watching a rat lover video. Please enjoy the video experience.
I've always had a soft spot for tactical shooter games. One of the first video games I ever played, in fact, was the original Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six from all the way back in 1998. I mostly remember just really hating the fact that you actually had to plan out your own missions and being upset that there was no weapon view model, but for all of its faults, playing it gave me a lifelong desire to kick doors in and mow down whoever happened to be on the other side. It's been about 20 years since the tactical shooter genre came onto the scene, but it's really only recently the graphics have gotten good enough to deliver a truly lifelike experience. Thanks to games like Ready or Not, the days of breaching a low-poly house to shoot at low-poly bad guys are over, and now you and your squad can pretend to be good guys in a disturbingly realistic environment. But I'm kinda nuts, okay? I'm a little bit cuckoo. When I first saw gameplay of Ready or Not, my first reaction wasn't excitement at the fact that there was finally a tactical shooter game with realistic graphics. My first reaction was, imagine if Left 4 Dead looked like this. See, I love the fast-paced action of Left 4 Dead 2 more than anything, but I also really appreciate the tactical parts of Ready or Not. So, my perfect game would ideally be a beautiful combination of the two. And, as it just so happens, Left 4 Dead 2 is one of the most moddable games in existence, and a pretty good amount of those mods are made by people just as insane as I am, and exist solely to make the game more like a realistic tactical shooter. So today, mostly just to scratch this really weird itch that I have, I'm going to do my best to turn a 15-year-old game into a modern one using a bunch of different mods and make Left 4 Dead 2 as realistic as humanly possible. If Valve won't remaster Left 4 Dead 2, then I guess I will. Now, I could have just jumped right in and instantly started adding a bunch of crazy-ass mods until my copy of Left 4 Dead looked like S.W.A.T 4, but I figured the best place to start would be to just take the default Left 4 Dead experience and make it look as good as I possibly can. That way we have a really nice blank canvas that we can dump a bunch of mods onto when the time comes. I played through the default vanilla version of Left 4 Dead for a little bit and tried to really think about what needed to be changed first. There are plenty of things that looked kind of dated, like a few of the weapon animations and view models, certain objects and props, and a pretty low-res look overall when it came to smaller textures, like on the faces of the common infected. Before I started messing with those tedious, tiny details though, I wanted to make a change that was physically big, but didn't mess with the game that much. Skyboxes. These are, they're little boxes that somehow make up the sky, or something. I'm not a game developer. Left 4 Dead has a bunch of different skyboxes, and to be honest with you, none of them look particularly amazing. They definitely serve their purpose, and in some cases can set the tone for how a certain level feels, but in a lot of cases they're also just these big gray blobs that are kinda blown out and lack any detail. So I got rid of them and installed a mod called Fancy Skies, which swaps out the default Left 4 Dead skyboxes with these new, highly detailed, lifelike skies. These look pretty nice, and I think you can easily make the case that they're more realistic than the original ones are. I will admit that the new sky on Dark Carnival is just a little bit fantastical and reminds me of something my mom would post on Pinterest, but as far as the daytime ones go, they're all a lot more realistic, have visible clouds, and look pretty picturesque. To round out this small graphical overhaul, I went ahead and installed a Reshade, a fancy little program that can add things like bloom and fake ray tracing to basically any 3D game. After borrowing a realism preset from someone here on YouTube, I loaded back into Left 4 Dead and honestly liked what I saw. It seemed to up the saturation quite a bit, added a bit of bloom, fake depth of field and ambient occlusion, and in general just made the game feel like it had a lot more depth. Unfortunately, one of the best looking effects, the ambient occlusion, seemed to glitch out super hard on some maps, and I could only get it consistently working on a few very specific campaigns. Trying to use it on No Mercy, for example, added these weird ghost artifacts all over the screen and made the game look pretty bad. In areas where it actually worked though, it looked really nice and made the game feel a lot more modern. I didn't even know this was possible, but I also found this filter called SSR which added screen space reflections to the game, which really looked insane on certain maps. It's hard to overstate just how much more organic the game feels with this enabled. Unfortunately, it didn't work on every map and also made my PC loud as hell, so I was going to have to use it very, very sparingly. While I was here playing around with shaders, I decided that I really wanted to take advantage of the added depth that Reshade introduced by implementing a dynamic lighting mod. What this does is add dynamic light and glow to certain elements of the game that frankly probably should have been there to begin with. Now, when you walk around with a bright object like a Molotov or a pipe bomb, light actually emits from it and will follow the object around. The same goes for enemies like tanks and chargers that have been lit on fire. It was a pretty small change, but one that I think makes everything come together much more nicely. Speaking of small changes, I rounded out the graphical overhaul by downloading cinematic lighting effects, which tastefully sprinkles in a nice helping of lens flare all around the game. And as everyone knows, there's nothing more realistic than lens flare. With just a few small mods, I now had a much more vibrant copy of Left 4 Dead. Everything felt much more alive thanks to reshade, and these beautiful endless skyboxes made the maps feel more like real places and less like arenas made just for killing zombies. Now, you might look at the footage on screen and think, wow, Bratlauber really ruined Left 4 Dead's art style. And to that I say, don't worry, it's about to get a lot worse. Left 4 Dead's weapons are pretty cool. They're high quality, well made, and honestly probably some of the best looking weapon models that Valve has ever created. I don't really think any of the guns are necessarily unrealistic, besides maybe the Desert Eagle that's big as hell for no reason, but I do think their animations are a little bit underwhelming. Maybe it's because they're so stiff, or maybe it's just because I've been looking at them for like 15 years now, but regardless of the reason, I knew that the only way to make them even more realistic was to overhaul them entirely. So I went over to the workshop and downloaded this weapon reanimation pack called Back to Left 4 Dead 2, a project led by one single developer that aims to tastefully reanimate every single weapon in the game and bring it up to more modern standards. And honestly, they did a really good job. The weapons are held much more realistically in the player's hands, the reload animations now have a sense of urgency to them, and despite technically being the exact same models as the default ones, they really did feel fresh. I particularly liked the M16's new animations, the combat rifle's new animations, and felt in general like the guns were being held at a much more believable angle. The Desert Eagle also looks like a normal sized gun now and not some freakishly large toy, so that's also a plus. While I was in the middle of using my newfangled firearms, I also decided it'd be a good time to download a more realistic flashlight. Left 4 Dead's default flashlight isn't necessarily unrealistic, but I grabbed this one from the workshop that aims to make it look more like a modern LED flashlight, and that looked pretty cool. I also used a console command to hide my crosshair, which I probably should have done a long time ago. I played through a pretty big chunk of the game like this, and honestly it already felt like I was playing a remastered version of Left 4 Dead. The game in this state was a pretty good mix of the realism I was going for, but also retained Left 4 Dead's unique identity. But as good as these reanimated weapons are, the mod isn't actually finished yet and therefore doesn't apply to every weapon in the game, which means that it's time to kick it up a notch and actually properly overhaul all of the guns. While browsing the workshop, I realized to myself that the best way to make the game realistic would be to find a weapon or a mod that lets you aim down the sights. But considering how Left 4 Dead's mod tools work, I figured that probably just wasn't possible. Which is why I was insanely surprised to find this huge weapon pack that not only replaces every weapon in the game with a more realistic model, but also enables you to aim down your sights. Sort of. Because of Left 4 Dead's modding limitations, the workaround for enabling ADS that this modder found was by just replacing the shooting and walking animations with an ADS animation. So every time you shoot, or if you slow down enough while you're moving, the gun will snap directly in front of your eyeballs and give the illusion that you're actually looking down at sights. Honestly, this felt way better than I expected it to, and definitely felt like a pretty significant realistic change. Unfortunately, it did result in a lot of weird animations and the gun moving around all crazy like when you get into heavy combat, but I'm honestly just more impressed by its ingenuity more than anything. I would have loved to make this my final weapon pack and call it quits here, but the general jankiness of the add-ons made me feel like I should probably find a set of weapons that are a bit more well-rounded and a little less experimental. So I elected instead to install a mixture of weapons from Modern Warfare, Ready or Not, and Escape from Tarkov, which I think are some of the most realistic shooters on the market. Despite being a little less interesting than the ones that let you aim down your sights, I felt like they were still a very solid choice. Every single weapon in the game has been replaced with a more realistic one, and this one even extends to melee weapons, unique level items, and throwable items, so it should ideally result in a much more cohesive experience. I'm definitely still going to use the ADS weapons here and there because they're honestly just cool as hell, but they're not going to be my main set of weapons or anything. There's definitely some more tactical looking ones I found that I'll be using here and there, but these are the most well-rounded ones. Also, I downloaded this cool tactical version of Bill so I could actually get some nice glove models. I'll download realistic versions of the rest of the cast later on, but I just wanted something real quick and dirty so I could get some cool army guy gloves. Now that I had a copy of Left 4 Dead with enhanced graphics and realistic weapons, it was time to actually fundamentally change how the game worked. Left 4 Dead's mechanics aren't super unrealistic, and there's even a realism mode that comes with the game by default, but all that really does is make the game harder and give the enemies more health, so I had to do a bit of my own tinkering to get exactly what I want. The first mod I installed was the Survivor leg script. This not only adds back in leg self-awareness from Left 4 Dead 1, but also adds support for custom models. Any player model I download from here on out will have real physical legs, which I think helps a lot with grounding the player in the world. I mean like literally, because my feet, they is on the ground. In keeping with that trend, I also decided to add the first-person animations mod. This does exactly what you think it does. Anytime the game would usually go into third person, like when you're healing or getting pinned by an infected, the game will stay in first person. I'll admit that it glitches out pretty often, and sometimes your hand will clip through objects and stuff, but I do think at the very least that's better than being pulled into third person when you're trying to play an immersive game. The next add-on was one that I find pretty important for making any game feel tactical, and that's the tactical movement speed mod. This does exactly what you think it does and just makes the player move a lot slower, and in general makes getting around feel a lot more weighty. I know rapid action and quick movement are pretty much cornerstones of Left 4 Dead's gameplay, but it's honestly a really fun and unique experience to play it at a slower pace and take your time clearing buildings like a true soldier. Or just like an airsoft player or something. I used a mod called the Ragdoll Collision mod to make it so that when infected die, they not only stay ragdolled forever, but are also a lot heavier and can collide with their own bodies. This made the game a lot more visceral and also made my PC louder than it ever has been before, which I took as a sign that I was on the right track. I know it seems like a super trivial addition, but being able to move zombies around after you kill them makes the game feel a lot more raw. I spent a longer time than I would like to admit shooting zombies and watching their bodies fly all over the place. In a weird way, it made every encounter with a zombie feel much more important. I installed this enhanced impact particle mod, which I honestly don't really notice when I'm playing, but side by side I do think it looks a lot better. I also downloaded an add-on that ports over the view tilt from Black Mesa and adds a little bit of lean when you strafe left or right. A pretty small change, but I think it worked pretty well for adding some fluidity to the movement. There aren't a lot of HD remakes of the common infected, but there are mods like this one that aim to make them just a little bit more diverse. This isn't necessarily making the game look better, but I do think it makes it more realistic by adding variety to the zombie population. I also downloaded some 4K textures for the special infected, but honestly there isn't much difference between these ones and the default ones. I downloaded these cool military player models for each of the 8 survivors, which I know doesn't necessarily have much to do with the mechanics of the game, but I have nowhere else to mention this fact, so I'm going to mention it now. I would have loved to spend more time adding a bunch of tactical mechanics to the game, but the truth is there just aren't that many because actually changing Left 4 Dead's core gameplay is pretty much the one thing modders can't do. So, I think it's best to call it here in terms of actual gameplay mechanics and move on to overhauling the maps. There aren't really any realism maps for Left 4 Dead on the workshop, and to be honest, it would probably be pretty hard for modders to make maps that look better than Valve's do. So while I couldn't just click one button and download some ultra-realistic map, I could make changes to the ones that I already had. I downloaded this huge collection of mods that takes basically every asset and texture in the game and upscales it to 4K. I'm not sure how well this is going to translate to a YouTube video, but personally I think this made a night and day difference. Every texture was now super detailed, even when you got up really close to it, and I honestly think that this mod alone took the game from looking like a 15-year-old game to a game that could have come out in the last 5 years. This mod even goes as far as to completely redo a few of the environment textures and replaced in-universe brands with real-world brands like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Some people might not like that because it's no longer lore-friendly, but I personally find small touches like that to be a very welcome change, and also, Pepsi and Coca-Cola, they're yummy, okay? They're just yummy. There were definitely some weird-looking assets in this pack, like these suspiciously clean HD cars, but I think small issues like that are well worth the huge visual upgrade that the game gets. I played through my new 4K Left 4 Dead for a little bit, and while it was insanely fun and I genuinely felt like I was playing a zombie mod for Ready or Not or something, I did want to try out some community-made maps. After all, custom maps are extremely important to the Left 4 Dead experience, and there's a good chance that we could find some cool, realistic ones. But, as much as it pains me to say it, a lot of custom maps just don't work when you have this many mods installed. I really wanted to play this one called Chernobyl because it's one of the most impressive custom maps I have ever seen, but attempting to play it with my mod pack enabled just hard crashed the game every single time. I did get some custom maps working though, like this gun range. It wasn't anything special, but it was well made and also a nice little place to show off the screen space reflections that Reshade adds. I also got a port of CS Office from Counter-Strike, which I know doesn't seem like it would be a super impressive map, but the addition of screen space reflections and slow tactical movement made it a really fun CQB experience. I know it probably sounds like a huge bummer that most custom maps in the workshop just flat out won't work with this mod pack, but I am very happy to report that this Five Nights at Freddy's map I downloaded works perfectly fine. So, you know, at least there's that. Alright, so there was basically no aspect of the game that I hadn't modded into oblivion, and honestly at this point I'm not even sure if I could install any more mods without my entire game collapsing on itself. But I did want to try a body camera mod for Reshade before I actually considered my work done. I headed over to Nexus Mods and installed this body cam mod. This mod is technically only supposed to be used for Ready or Not, but I don't care about that, so I'm going to use it in Left 4 Dead. This looked pretty good and added another layer of realism to the game, but to be honest, no matter how many mods you install, Left 4 Dead's weapons will always be a little too stiff to believably look like they've been recorded on a body camera. It did pair pretty nicely with those ADS weapons I talked about earlier though. I think you'd have to be a real freak to play through the game like this, and this definitely won't be my main Reshade setup, but it did work pretty well for LARPing as a cool SWAT guy. Also, I added slow-mo. Not because slow-mo is realistic, but because slow-mo is epic. And with that, my friends, I was done. There may be a few things I could have done differently and a few mods I forgot to install, but for the most part, I think I can pretty confidently say that I made Left 4 Dead as realistic as possible.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm pretty proud of my realism mod pack, and I think it looks good on just about any game mode. It's really bizarre just how different the game feels with it installed, considering most of the mods are purely visual and don't even really affect the gameplay in any way. If you're looking to play a slower, more methodical, and dare I say it, tactical Left 4 Dead, you should give this a try. There's definitely some issues with it, and in hindsight, maybe I could have added some more mechanics and also maybe toned down the saturation a little bit, but I set out making this video to combine Left 4 Dead and Ready or Not, and to be honest, I think I did that. It's kind of ridiculous just how moddable Left 4 Dead 2 is, and that's probably 99% of the reason people even still play this game. If anyone out there happens to own a game studio worth millions of dollars, I humbly request that you make a Left 4 Dead Ready or Not game as soon as humanly possible. That's pretty much it though. As one final point of comparison, here's what the game looked like at the start of the video, and here's what it looks like now. I had a lot of fun messing around with one of my favorite games of all time, and I hope you enjoyed watching me do that. Big shout out to these people for being the creative geniuses that actually made the mods you saw in this video, and big shout out to these people for making cool ass Left 4 Dead realism videos that in some ways inspired this one. Also, when I made my Gmod realism video, I forgot to take all the mods that I installed and put it in a collection, so this time I did. This time you can go to the Steam Workshop and just hit download, and all the mods will be installed, so I got you covered this time. Sorry for not doing it last time. Thanks for watching. I've been Ratlobber. Peace.